Very happy to invite Andy McFarlane to this session. So Andy is a senior product manager with Seek Asia. Seek Asia operates the leading online employment marketplaces, JobStreet and JobDB within Asia. So Andy has in-depth experience in product commercialization and go-to-market strategy. He has a very good grasp and expertise on ASEAN markets. With an interest in digital marketing and great entrepreneurial streak, Andy runs his own travel-based website, TPC Media. He's an alumnus of Dublin Institute of Technology. So here today, Andy is going to speak to us about continuous product discovery. So you are going to listen to a lot of interesting stuff. And Andy, thank you so much for joining us. We are very, very happy and honored to host you and handing this session over to you.
Great, thanks. Thanks so much for the introduction. I'll just share my screen now when I can.
Sure, I'll stop sharing.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, super. Hopefully you can all see my screen okay.
Perfect.
Okay, cool. So a big hello to everyone, and echoing the comments made earlier, I hope everyone's keeping safe, healthy, and well at this time, especially. And I just want to say a big thanks for you all for taking the time to join me for this webinar this evening. So as we mentioned, I'm going to be speaking to you today a little bit about continuous product discovery. So I think, as product managers and product leaders, we all know that the success of our products depends so heavily on our ability to learn quickly and to iterate rapidly, and also to understand our users and their problems that we need to solve. But sometimes I think, coming up with ways that we can solve this can be quite tricky, right? And continuous discovery is one such method that attempts to help us as product managers to discover and validate the assumptions early. So it's something, I've put into practice quite a bit myself in the past, and it's been very helpful as a framework to discovering the opportunities. It's a process that's been widely founded and promoted by a product discovery coach named Teresa Torres. And I would recommend anyone interested to read more about her work around continuous product discovery after this talk as well. So just before we get going, I think just to cover off some of the challenges that continuous discovery attempts to solve, right? So, what continuous discovery attempts to solve primarily is that we can increase the speed of our feedback loop and we can amplify our learning, that we make the process more sustainable around discovery. So, we can reduce the complexity, the difficulty in doing discovery, and the time of organizing and adding users across different groups. It also allows teams to quickly adapt and reduce the risk of getting it wrong. And it improves and closes the alignment gap that so often happens between delivery and discovery. So continuous discovery product teams and product managers should basically be outcome oriented, committed to doing regular check-ins with their actual customers, and able to deliberate in a mature fashion about the opportunities and solutions that present themselves. So just before I move on, again, echoing the comments made earlier, I'll be delighted to receive your questions, and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can towards the end of the session as well. So we'll start with a little bit of an introduction about myself. Andy McFarlane is my name, and I work as a senior product manager for Seek in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. As Minaka mentioned, Seek Asia is a subsidiary of the larger Seek Australian group, and they operate a number of leading online employment marketplaces, including JobStreet and JobsDB here in Asia. As for myself, I'm Irish, and I've worked across a number of different industries. So I've worked in industries ranging from oil and gas to education, and across a number of different roles, from digital marketing all the way to COO of a startup. So, and of course, a number of countries I've worked across as well. And so particularly, I've spent a lot of time in commercialization, product development, and GTM strategy. So I also welcome you, before we move on, to connect with me online after the talk. And I look forward to sharing and discussing more around product management with anyone who's interested. So do feel free to connect with me using the links below. So let's have a quick look at this evening's agenda and what I've got in store for you. We'll be covering not just in continuous discovery, really, but in all your product work, outcomes over outputs. After that, we'll be spending a little bit of time on how to build a journey map with your teams, how to use it to search for opportunities. After that, I'm going to be introducing the opportunity solution tree and how we can use it, and then take our prospective solutions and identify opportunities and how we can translate those ideas into ideas and assumptions, and then we can design and plan for tests accordingly. So many companies globally now are doing their best to follow OKR, or objectives and key results. And there's a lot online out there about this already, so I won't dwell on that too much, and I'm sure many of you are already working perhaps in organizations or familiar with organizations who have OKRs. But there's no doubt that the first step towards any successful work in continuous discovery is to figure out the outcome that you're trying to drive, or the outcome you're trying to achieve, and what you'd like the work on your product to actually result in. So I have some advice to doing this, and primarily make sure you identify an outcome that will either extend existing value or add new value to your business. And I think so often as product managers and product leaders, we think primarily about what new things we can build, and how we can release new features. But I think one thing to bear in mind is there's probably much greater, especially in an existing business, there's much greater value in you extending the existing value of your product than trying to add any incremental value sometimes. So when you're trying to come up with outcomes or what you're trying to drive in your organization, I think sometimes it's wise to take a step back and also think about what value you already have within your business and how you could make that go further. So, I think coming up with outcomes can be quite complicated if you've so far been working, for example, in a feature factory, or if you've been only basing your success on outputs. And when I say outputs, I mean features or release delivery, for example. If that's been the case, I think you have to try to reframe your thinking in terms of what user or customer value you're expecting or hoping for. For example, if you previously had a result perhaps to deliver a new Android app, then an alternative outcome-based result might be how many monthly active users you're targeting on mobile, for example. So think about, if you're coming from a background where you've been basing your measurement on outputs, think about how you can translate that over into outcomes, as I mentioned at the bottom of that slide. So areas like, for example, increasing engagement, and that's perhaps measured by monthly active users, or if you're trying to improve usability, perhaps it's reduced by a percentage or reduced by a number of clicks to get to a certain point in your flow, or improving satisfaction via NPS, for example. These are all very good examples of outcome-based. And so, along with making sure that your goal isn't vague, I think just make sure that whatever outcome you try to set yourself, even if you're not following OKRs, can be achieved ideally in no more than 3 months' time. And the reason for that is that it's good to break things down to a certain level of time, and something over 6 months becomes much harder to try and break into subtasks and make sure that you're staying on track. Whereas 3 months, sounds quite long, but it's a surprisingly short amount of time when you're being held to account for it. If you have multiple goals, try to focus on one as the primary. So, I know a lot of teams, and I've worked in a lot of teams where we've had, a whole bunch of different goals. Like, for example, even within my current role right now, we focus on onboarding, acquisition, retention across one particular section of the jobs marketplace. It'll be just so much easier for your team to be able to focus if you focus on one primary goal or outcome at a time. This will also help you make a bigger impact, rather than delivering very much smaller incremental improvements across a number of different initiatives. And I really hope that this goes without saying, but make sure that whatever outcome you focus on, make sure that these things are actually something that are within your team's domain, right? So making sure that you pick up on something that's within your control, and that you have the requisite resources and authority to make that impact. Or if you don't, that you've managed to secure them for the quarter in which you're working. I see, a lot of cases of work that hasn't been scoped appropriately, or outcomes, that are going to end up having multiple cross-team dependencies. And so this is something to be very aware of as you start negotiating your outcomes with your leadership team. Last of all, I recommend, once you've narrowed down a few key potential outcomes, set up a session both with your immediate product team and your product leadership teams to get this locked in. So again, I'm very aware that in a number of companies you'll have results maps, or you'll have some kind of steer from your domain leadership. But I think it's worthwhile, even for those of us who maybe are only just starting out in product management, to start addressing areas like this early, because focusing on an outcome and negotiating your outcome with your product and leadership teams will already enable you to understand how it is to try and negotiate for the things that you want and you need, and also to understand some of the thinking from your leadership team as well. So before we actually go on to the journey map and start kind of figuring out how we put one together, what is a journey map, I guess? And so we need to be able to identify the opportunities to impact your customers. And to do that, we need to form an understanding of the current experience. So in my opinion, a good journey map should be a visualization of a user's experience while attempting to solve their problem. And for many of us, particularly if we work across marketplaces like classified ads, or perhaps, in my case, job marketplaces. We already have a fairly good understanding of that experience because we have applied for jobs or because we have tried to sell something through a classified ad site. But this can be a little bit trickier, perhaps, if you're working on a product where you probably wouldn't actually have had to solve the problem otherwise. And that's okay. I think when you start thinking about how you're going to create a good journey map, it's perfectly fine for you to be able to get your whole team together and think about how you would best do this based on your understanding of the problem that you're trying to solve as a user. So for you and your team, this is an important tool to better understand needs and pain points so that you can go about identifying the opportunities that might potentially address them. It's also a time when your team needs their best storytelling skills, right? So, there's really no point doing this activity unless your team are quite bought into it and they'll be social enough to speak up. And, we need to make sure that as we identify different parts of the journey map, everyone finds the experience relatable. I've had this experience before, and I'm sure you guys probably all have as well. So, I've built or used features that, in my opinion, were just so simple. I understood them perfectly. I thought, wow, anyone who doesn't really know how to do this or who gets stuck, must be probably not very clever. And then a colleague or a friend or someone comes up and tells you, hey, what's wrong with this product, or what's wrong with this website or this app? It's terrible. It's impossible. Like, why is there a feature down here, or why is there some optionality missing? And this is, a key reason why we go about building a journey map, right? So involving your whole team in building a journey map ensures that we capture these opinions and feelings that we ourselves, probably could overlook or think, perhaps percentage-wise that the impact is negligible. And I'm a very big proponent of you inviting as many people as you possibly can into your journey map sessions, because again, this is a situation where you need to understand the needs of your users, and you and your product team who go about solving this problem every single day, you might be almost too bought into it and not be able to see the smaller details. So how are we going to go about doing this? So to do a good journey map, the main things you're going to need are a lot of Post-it notes and Sharpie pens. So grab a lot of Post-it notes, grab your teammates, grab whoever you can, ideally, hand out a bunch to each of your team members. And how we approach this is we draw actions or feelings on each card as you, the user, navigate through the experience. So for example, when I worked in education, this was how do you sign up or start a new education course, right? And think through it for a minute now, right? You sign up for a course and we understand how it happens, but if you break that down into granular steps and as singularly as you possibly can, this kind of goes from the very beginning where you need to be aware that you even need further education. How are you going to go about researching what courses? How do you feel at the stage where you're researching those courses? What kind of things are you going to be looking out for? When you find a course you're interested in, what will you be doing then? Maybe perhaps there's an eligibility check. So how do you feel while you're waiting for the response from that eligibility check? All the way through to paying and enrolling, and what happens after that. So what does the experience finish like as well? And so this is effectively what we're trying to do with a journey map, right? We're trying to encompass as much of how your user feels and goes about the process. And it's fine for you to think outside of your product, right? So nobody just suddenly magically arrives at your product and knows exactly what to do. They probably spent quite a bit of time researching. They felt different emotions. These are all the things that you're looking to try and identify. In the jobs marketplace where I'm working currently, we often approach this from either the candidate side or the job seeker side, right? Or even hiring companies. And again, how do you get a new job? Think through it from every single step, beginning with you probably actually need to be aware that you need a job in the first place. Maybe you're feeling sad because your current job isn't good. It's amazing, right? Because I guarantee if we all did this activity right now, first we wouldn't finish anywhere near our time, but people's interpretations and experiences will be completely different from one to the other. So when you've done it, and it won't be as neat looking as my graphic, I hope, what you're going to do is make sure yourself and your team members take turns describing it. So one of the key messages I have here is that there should be no negativity, right? This isn't this can't be done, or that's not true, or it's impossible. Let your team members ask clarifying questions. like perhaps, why do they feel that way, or why do they research how to get a job a certain way in the case of the jobs business. But remember, this is an exercise to understand and consolidate the voice realistically of your customers. It's not in the same way that you wouldn't challenge your customers about why they go about doing something a certain way. So here comes the fun part. Once everyone's shared their perspective, force yourselves to try and build a shared understanding by arranging each other's notes into one single journey. So you can see that, where we had colleague A, colleague B, and colleague C in this graphic, we've now kind of tried to consolidate it into one single go. I'm just highlighting that there for you. So the critical part to this, I guess, and it sounds very awkward, and to be honest, it is a little awkward if you haven't done it before, but try to do this activity entirely in silence. So, if we follow the correct way to do continuous discovery using this process, you do this activity completely in silence. And if you don't agree that someone's card is in the right place, move it. I mean, don't throw it away unless there's clear duplicates. And when I say clear duplicates, I mean exact matches. But place your cards where you feel they best fit, but be open to moving your cards around as others do the same. So ultimately what you're going to end up with is a timeline, exactly how your users go through the process of solving their problem that they have, all the way to the end. And it's going to be pretty messy, right? The cards are not going to look like this. They're going to be kind of all over the place. And it sounds kind of crazy, but you'll be surprised how quickly this process will go, especially in silence, since you'll find that nobody gets distracted or caught up in conversations or kind of meaningless discussions. So once that's done, discuss it as a team. So once you've got one single line, discuss it as a team, have a team member walk through the journey. So have one of your team members try and walk the whole way through this. And, of course, they're not going to understand everyone's point, but if they can just share as loosely as possible what's happening, how the user's feeling, what are they going to do next, why are they going to do that next, all the way through to the end. And once that's done, get back in and spend some time in silence again and refine it again. And so my key message here is that, much like how you iterate with your product in your feature releases, this is something that you need to iterate through and refine a number of times. And it'll take you quite a few rounds, but eventually you'll kind of collectively reach a point where the map has been refined as much as possible, and the improvements that you're getting, like how clean these cards are, is going to become really very only incremental. So the key factors here, I guess, once we're all done, is how do we identify sort of opportunities from here, right? And so from industries that I've worked in, I've kind of highlighted a few of the things that have come to us from continuous discovery sessions in the past. So for example, on a job site, candidates apply, but they don't hear anything. So, I'm sure some of you have had this experience before. You apply for a job and then you don't hear anything. You don't hear that you were successful. You don't hear that you were unsuccessful. You've actually got no idea whether they've even received your application. So this was something that we identified previously, and it kind of came, kind of towards the latter stages of the flow. So that's an obvious opportunity, right? It's pretty straightforward. We've all been in that situation. We can all empathize with our customer in this case. So, the challenge here becomes, how do we prioritize that, and what do we do about sort of assessing how we can fix that problem? On a classified site, for example, much earlier in the flow, you might have somebody trying to post an ad. What category is the most accurate, right? Maybe there's kind of household and domestic goods, and they're really not too sure which one they should go for. A challenge for me in a previous role in education was how to choose a most relevant course, right? So if you've got, a large education marketplace, you're going to have a lot of courses that are kind of very closely matching. And if you put this in a sort of a catalog layout, there's really not a whole lot that's very easy for the user to differentiate between them, right? Okay, excellent. So now that we've taken the time to kind of pick off, a couple of different pain points along the way, we've probably got about 3 to 5 all being well. We need to identify and size some of these opportunities, right? So at this stage, what we basically have are just a collection of user pain points that we think we might like to have a go solving. So what do we need to consider? First of all, we have to focus on what factors matter to kind of your customers, first of all. And when I say your customers, like what causes them the most difficulty or prevents them from getting a job done? How often does this pain come up? How many customers does it impact? So think through these think through these problems, discuss it with your team, try and identify what you can. Same for your market. So in terms of the market that you're operating in, are any of these pain points already being well addressed or perhaps not being well addressed by your competitors? And how would it affect your competitive position if you were to go about addressing this pain point? And from your product point of view, even though we should always be working towards releasing and addressing pain points and problems for our users, it is worth stepping back for a moment to think, are these pain points or potential opportunities just way outside the scope of your product? Does this leverage any strengths that your product already has? How does it fit into the overall strategy of your team as well? My advice, of course, as always, is if you're not too sure, make sure to get feedback from any strategy colleagues you may have or any product leaders, and really try and work through this and take it into account. Where possible, list out the opportunities one by one. So, opportunity, and then you're going to have customer, market, product, and try and mark, high, medium, and low impact for each of your factors. And have a think what else is missing. So, do you need to understand more? Is there not sufficient data available, perhaps? Try and have each team member work through each opportunity. So, if you just sit there as a product manager and you try and work through these opportunities, you're going to be going into this kind of with a degree of confirmation bias. You already have an idea what you'd probably like to work on. And perhaps different team members are going to assess the impact slightly differently across those three variables as well. And so for where we are right now in the discovery phase 2, I can't advocate strongly enough that quick and efficient are the keywords, right? So don't get stuck kind of with business intelligence analysis or anything too hardcore. What you want to do at this point is just keep kind of light and easy and pick up whatever analytics and whatever metrics you can kind of quickly grab from your analytics tools. Don't kind of go off to do, if you start trying to gather a whole bunch of research, you're kind of wrecking the idea of a continuous discovery, right? So keep it kind of lightweight as much as possible. And if it turns out that there's data that you really would like or that you'd have to wait for, consider if there's some other way that you can possibly get that, maybe perhaps through a parallel metric. Okay, awesome. So let me introduce you to the opportunity solution tree. Perhaps some of you have seen this before, I hope so, but in case you haven't, the opportunity solution tree, effectively it helps us make our assumptions explicit, right? It helps us connect the opportunities to solutions that we can go about testing. It also allows the team to critique our thinking, and it also helps to guide us on what we should be doing next. So we'll start with our desired outcome. And we identified this earlier on, as you'll remember, in the outcomes over outputs. And we're going to add a couple of boxes for the opportunities that we identified earlier on as well. So at this stage, these are going to be kind of rough. They're just going to be user pain points effectively. And we're going to express those opportunities. It's perfectly fine to express these opportunities also as something the customer wants or would ask for. So for example, if this was a supermarket, you might say, well, finding what I need is too difficult. When you do this activity, get as diverse a group in the room as you possibly can and include whoever you can across as many disciplines. So, I keep saying this, but particularly with continuous discovery, this is a multi-stakeholder approach, but it should be product-led. So where possible, please bring in your colleagues from other teams who will have a different and diverse view. So as I mentioned to you at the start, a lot of the continuous discovery process has been spearheaded by a lady named Teresa Torres, and she's advocated brainwriting rather than brainstorming. And so with brainwriting, we actually introduce the opportunity, and then we give everyone in the room 10 minutes or so to write down their own ideas and solutions in silence, once again, of course. And at the end, you're going to have your team members share the ideas one by one. So each team member will stand up and pretty much list out, okay, well, look, here's the opportunity you mentioned, here's a few ideas I have. And what I can't speak enough about is, at this stage especially, keep it as lightweight as possible. Try as much as you can not to have any negativity. It doesn't matter if the solution is, going to cost $1 billion or if it's nearly impossible. Just hear it out anyway. And this, after this is done, once again, we're going to do some iterative rounds. So iterative rounds of brainwriting, give everyone another 10 minutes, let them go back to it. And this will actually allow your team members to have an opportunity to pick up on the ideas that they did like, or that maybe could work, or the solutions that, perhaps show a little bit more promise than others. And what you're going to find is that your team members will start to iterate and expand further upon the ideas that they liked, right? So, what was maybe an average or kind of a good idea in the last round, somebody will take and kind of polish like a diamond, and it'll become a very good idea in the next round. And if it's possible, and I know this can be quite a difficult ask, especially in some larger companies and even in busy startups, try not to do a big full day session for this. I mean, I know it's tempting, and sometimes we kind of get into this thing of holding a workshop for half a day or longer, but try not to do this. If it's possible for you, try to set maybe just 1 hour for 2 or 3 days. So break it over multiple days and times. And what that's going to do is it's going to give your team members a chance to go away, get back to their day-to-day routine, reflect a little bit. And when they come back the next time, they've maybe expanded even further upon the ideas or the solutions. They probably have some more. And when you reach the end of this, what you want to do is decide as a group how you'll be choosing the most promising idea. So, before you reach that point, what I would suggest is that you get together with your team and you decide, okay, well, when we have a whole bunch of solutions, what will the success criteria actually be, right? And it's fine, to kind of make this as democratic as possible. So something that we've done in the past is kind of doing a dot vote. So everyone gets up and just dots on the Post-it note what their favorite potential solutions are. But make sure that whatever you're doing, people should only be voting for solutions that they believe can actually move the outcome. So at the end of that, what we want to do is we want to end up ideally with, the most kind of promising 3. Then if we just move forward. So, hopefully now we have a few clear solutions. The next question is going to be, how do we decide what to do first, right? So you're probably going to be a little bit surprised with this. My answer here is actually don't vote on your favorite solution and go for it. Because I think, we all have our own version of what we think is the best thing for our product. And to just go for the favorite solution that everyone votes for, it would be wrong. And it would also be full of untested assumptions, right? So the first thing that we need to do is be really careful to avoid these kind of whether or not decisions. So, when you start thinking about it, you shouldn't be thinking, okay, should we pursue this feature? Will the feature work? Should we consider a free option for this feature? Because these are all likely to set us up to fall victim to confirmation bias. So research, of course, as we know, has shown that we're twice as likely to notice confirming evidence or evidence in favor of our choice than disconfirming evidence. So when we ask something like this, we're actually setting ourselves up to see the evidence that we want, right? So instead, what I would suggest is we need to think about how to set up some form of comparative evaluation, right? So when I say comparative evaluation, I mean, of course, it would be lovely, if we had all the resources in the world, that we can go off and build all the solutions and say, okay, well, which one is the best? But of course, we can't, right? So instead, it's best to take all the potential solutions and consider them in the context of questions instead. So questions, you might ask here would be, why would we invest in this solution? And ask it across all the solutions you have. What impact might it have on our metrics? And again, you want to do this across all the potential solutions you have. Are there any harms or risks it could cause? Why is it important? And take the time to question your thinking as a group. So if you say we should invest in this solution because it'll save us money, how do you know that? Like, what has influenced that as well? And if you're saying, well, it's going to have a 20% impact on visits, how do you know it's going to have a 20% impact on metrics? Where are you getting that from? So, my point here is really be comparing the solutions against each other that you've identified, and also be questioning your own lines of thinking among your team as well, right? Making sure that you're not just kind of saying, okay, this is going to have a really good impact, it's going to be really low cost, just because, the kind of confirmation bias is beginning to creep in, right? And so, once you've reached this point, you'll have a much better idea of what are actually the solutions that are showing the most promise. And that at least allows you to kind of, before you commit to developing or starting to build these features out or these solutions, it'll allow you then to identify, what kind of experiments you might be able to run to help you fully validate this before you commit yourself to development work. Okay, great. So by now, hopefully, we've kind of story mapped the top potential solutions. And so, when I say story mapped, I'm not going to get into story mapping in its entirety right now, but my expectation is that you would have considered your potential solutions in terms of how people will get value from it. You've listed sort of the main actors that will benefit from your solution. You've chronicled what somebody has to do to get value from your potential solution, and that you've identified the assumptions that would need to be correct for the user to get value. So, what kind of things are we assuming about our users and about kind of the feasibility, viability, desirability, etc., that would need to be proven true. And this is very important because what we know from the lean startup is that we should be testing our assumptions, not our ideas, right? This lets us move quickly, it lets us evolve what isn't working, and it lets us collect learning for the future. So mark down all the assumptions of your potential solution. So, let's say, for example, we're back in the supermarket again, and one of our assumptions is that coupons will increase brand loyalty. Let's pretend. So first of all, what data will convince us that this assumption was either true or false, right? How do we know this? And then how might we go about collecting this data, right? So this will, force you to challenge your assumptions and to really be able to hold yourself to account. Mark down the evidence you require if there's any to test any riskier assumptions. And remember, with all of this, as I keep saying, confirmation bias will likely lead you to look for evidence supporting your hypothesis. So make sure to document what you need to see in order to be very sure that you're being very scientific in your experiments. And how you might collect that data will also inform your experiments. These can be anything from kind of questionnaires after a simulation, or perhaps in-person testing with functional prototypes. And what you're really trying to do here is kind of design appropriate experimentation, bearing in mind the assumptions that you've made along the way, and really fully validate your potential solution before you commit to a full-scale build. So after that, you're ready to go, and you're going to be testing your potential solutions. You're going to gain market validation, hopefully, or you're perhaps not, before moving into the development and delivery phases. So I've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to share with you guys today, and it's a pretty quick run through, I realize, but that's because I'm hoping to spend a little bit more time if anyone has any questions. I guess, I can't speak highly enough about sort of the use of continuous discovery as a process, and also the opportunity solution tree. And I think, if I was to kind of go back to this, I would just keep repeating that, it's so important to keep this going. It's so important that you bring in as many people as you possibly can, be as transparent as you can, and really make sure that you're capturing as many different ideas and diversity of opinions and voices as you possibly can. And that'll really help you as a product manager in being able to fully understand, the wide range of users that you hopefully have, right? So guys, that's pretty much my sharing for this evening. As I say, continuous discovery really gives us such a clear pathway to finding user problems that need to be solved. It's something I particularly have gotten tremendous value out of. It's something, of course, that I think, like so many product tools and product frameworks, you need to kind of take it and own it yourself and find out what works best for your team. But it's particularly helped me around, validating and testing assumptions and making sure to get market feedback in an iterative and timely fashion. It was a real pleasure to speak with you guys, and I hope you found the sharing so far helpful. I'm really excited to see and hear, hopefully, how some of you get on running continuous discovery sessions out in the real world. So like I said at the start of my presentation, do please feel free to connect with me and let me know. Or if you have any questions afterwards, I'll be more than happy to take those. And like I said, in the meantime, I'll be delighted to have a look and see what questions, if there are any, and try and answer a couple for you guys. So thank you all so much for your time.
Great, thank you, Andy, so much. We have received some questions. Would you like to check the Q&A window?
Yeah, sure. Let me just have a look.
Sure.
Wow, there's quite a few. Let me try and let me just have a look and see if I can find a one.
Sure.
So I think I'll start from probably, okay, so Shubham has asked, can you elaborate how focusing on outcome unlocks new value, using an example? Sure, so I think, actually this is less, focusing on an outcome for me is less about unlocking new value. It can also be about unlocking, existing value or extending existing value within your product. I think, it's always risky when you focus too much also on new value. But I think in terms of an example here, so when we think of, how to release a product or how to launch a new product, so particularly if there's something within your product that's not being ticked off currently. So let's say, you're not really managing to meet metrics across some area, or you're not really too sure kind of what you should be trying to tick off. I think this is where continuous discovery provides you an appropriate feedback loop, actually, to also kind of dictate what are the outcomes that you probably should be focusing on in terms of your product discovery and delivery going forward. So focusing on an outcome for me is less about whether it's new value or existing value. It's more about making sure that you're focusing outcomes that will be meaningful kind of for your product or your business, or particularly your user. Cool. So I think I just answered that question. I'll put it in there.
Sure.
How do we measure the outcome for the end users? That's a great question from Ranjan. So how do we measure the outcome for the end users? So this is a little bit like I talked about kind of right at the start, and I gave a few examples there. I think, you know, when we think about measuring the outcome for the end users, you've got to think, what is it that you're hoping the end users will have experienced at the end? Because so often when we think about outcomes, we're also kind of thinking about what we want, right? So those were the examples I gave, like monthly active users or visits, for example. For us, for end users, we tend to do a couple of different things to try and measure the outcome. One is, of course, the success of some of our business metrics. So, you know, one of my outcomes that I'm working on at the moment is to make it easier for hirers to post a job ad, right? And so the truth of it is, an outcome there for us is, you know, the outcome is making it easier to post a job ad, but how we're going to get there and the kind of measurement metric of that will ultimately be a conversion metric, right? So we know that we're doing a good job of making it easier if the conversion is able to go up. And of course, that's a very simplified version of it, I suppose. What I would say is, where it's possible, it's really worthwhile trying to identify what other kind of methods you can measure outcome. And so this kind of speaks to areas like, you know, NPS scoring or satisfaction surveys, for example. And I'm a big fan of those, but of course that assumes also that your product is delivering healthy metrics as well for you.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
We have some anonymous attendee questions also. Andy, it's totally your call, which question you want to take.
Sure. So there's one anonymous attendee question that I quite like. It's, do you recommend having customers as part of the journey mapping exercise? So, you know, that's a tough one, and I'm going to be honest, it's not one I've experienced in the past. So, you know, with the companies I've worked for, we've tended to bring customers in more for kind of design research or for research cadence, where we walk them through functional prototypes, etc. Probably more to actually test our assumptions towards the latter stages. But would I have a problem with bringing customers in? No, I wouldn't actually at all. And I think, you know, if that option is available to you, it's worthwhile just making sure that you do it the same way that I prescribed earlier. So making sure that your customers come in, they map the journey as it means to them, but that they do it in silence. And you probably need to be just a little bit more careful, making sure that your team, you know, don't influence them or don't appear to be kind of telling them, oh no, that's not the right way to use the product or anything like that. Because, you know, this is a situation where probably if you were going to do the journey mapping exercise, it would almost be worthwhile sort of figuring out how you can have your customers do it kind of in parallel as much as possible, because you don't want them to become influenced or to feel that their feedback wasn't worthwhile, right? So just making sure that you really, you know, kind of step up your empathy level, bringing customers in. But actually, I think it's quite a good idea. Okay, I'll move on to the next one. Yeah, so Rohit has a question about confirmation bias. Even if your team has discussed different solutions or experiments and picked a few for particular customer pain, how can we ensure that there is no confirmation bias if the team is homogeneous, which tech teams tend to be? Is there a scientific test to see that we have taken care of confirmation bias? Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, you know, this is just something that's so difficult to just kind of try to get past. I'm not aware of any scientific test that takes care of confirmation bias, so that can really, you know, say that you've kind of managed to avoid it successfully. And I think even with the guidance that I've shared, and a lot of this I've picked up and kind of been also taught myself, it's still a very tough area. And I think, you know, you as a team, it depends on the maturity of your team, right? A very mature team will probably be more cognizant of when confirmation bias might be creeping in. They may have probably had experience in the past where they've allowed it to creep in and they've had a failure as a result. But particularly with younger teams, I think that's probably the risk where you find, you know, kind of less experience, less failures in the past, and less learning as a result. And this is really the kind of team that I'd say, you know, you need to watch out for and try as much as you possibly can to identify any early signs of confirmation bias. But it's tough, and I think even in the best team, there's a little bit of a degree of that still. But there's sadly no scientific test that I've seen that's taken care of it. But Rohit, if you find a scientific test to take care of it, please let me know. I'd be dying to hear. Cool. So I'm just having a look. There's so many questions. I'm trying to find some of my favorites, I guess.
Yeah. We have 10 minutes, definitely.
Sure. So Sangeeta asked, how do you prioritize the identified opportunities? So, this is a good point. And I think I spoke a little bit about kind of how you go through working through the solutions that you want to address, particularly in opportunities. I think, you should probably approach this in a very similar fashion, to be honest, as what I mentioned earlier. So really consider those pain points that I mentioned. So the pain points, in this case, are the kind of the user or the customer opportunities, and consider them in terms of the impact that they're having, right? So, if we think back to the job marketplace example that I shared a little bit earlier, perhaps you how you go about finding suitable jobs to apply for in a job marketplace. Perhaps you find the interface a little confusing, or you're not sure which job to apply for first. That's, as a customer, that's kind of a medium impact problem. But not hearing back and not getting any feedback whatsoever on all your applications, that's a much higher impact problem, I would say. And I think this is something that when you do this kind of identification and you come up with 3 to 5 different opportunities, you need to spend time with your team and still go through the process of kind of ideating at a rough level what solutions you could possibly come up with for each. And I think that prioritizing the actual opportunity will largely come down to how big a pain point is it for your customers. And that's something that you need, as I mentioned earlier, to have as diverse a voice and diverse an opinion from as many stakeholders as possible for. Krishna has asked, which one do you prioritize? One feature asked by many small customers, or another one asked by a big customer? Both have equal complexities to be built. So, this will really depend, I suppose, on a number of factors, right? It's going to probably depend on, to some degree, your ability to move within your product to cater for those scenarios. It'll also depend on your company and if there's any kind of strategic priorities towards what kind of customers you're trying to attract or that you would hope to get. My personal opinion, I suppose, completely by myself, would be that I think you've got to think about the lifetime value of those customers, and building one thing for one customer is an inherently huge risk, right? So what if that customer, if it's a subscription, doesn't renew next year? Or what if they decide not to use their product, or they find a competitor product that they prefer? Then you've effectively built something for nobody. Whereas one feature asked by many small customers, even if a couple of them turn over or churn, at least your customer or your feature is still serving value to the remainder of those customers. And I think there's always that potential that small customers can grow in size over time as well, or they can have increasingly higher usage needs as time goes by. So it'll really come down to your situation. But my personal opinion would be I would probably try to prefer prioritizing for the smaller customers where possible, especially if there's a sizable quantum of those. Sandeep has not a question, but he just wanted to share what we do in our organization. When a new employee joins my team, we make it mandatory for him or her to identify opportunities to improve the product and also suggest a possible solution as part of enablement. This has given great results, especially because of a new and fresh perspective. Yeah, I actually really like that. I really like that suggestion. So, I haven't come across that in any organization that I've worked in. I've come across, I suppose, personally speaking, in interviews for product managers and product associates that I've done in the past. I have challenged them to try and, I tend to lay out a business problem or a product problem that we actually have and see how they go about solving it. But more usually just from the point of view of assessing critical thinking and how they would go about solving a problem and prioritizing. But I think that's a really lovely idea. And it's something that probably encourages your team as well to kind of get stuck into the product and have a go and have a good look at it. And try and identify what could be improved. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, Sandeep. Okay, cool. So Kirtan asked, how do we choose the best and right outcome? And is it advisable to focus on not more than 1 or 2 outcomes? And yeah, that's a fair point. So I guess I don't have a hard and fast rule about 1 or 2 outcomes or even 3 or 4 outcomes. I think, you know, it's really up, again, it's really up to you and your team to kind of figure out what's doable for you. What I would say is, in my personal opinion and what I've found so far, teams just do better when there's one primary focus, right? So it's fine if you have 2 or 3 outcomes or even more, but where possible, you know, try and pin down as much as you can your primary outcome that you're hoping to achieve. And at least that will give the team, you know, really strong clarity, and they'll be much more willing to kind of dedicate time in their day to making a bigger impact on that than kind of breaking up their day into 1 hour, 1.5 hours, etc. How to choose the best and right outcome? Again, I think it's very situational, and it depends, you know, what's important to your product, what's important to your users, what's important to your business as well. And so this will really depend on the kind of product you're working on.
We had one question in the chat window. I think it was from Ashwati. So she already asked it here.
Oh, sure. Sorry, I didn't see the chat actually.
Ashwati Girija Devi. I think she already asked the question here.
Okay, sure. Okay, yeah, I'll come to that in a few minutes. Sure. So Kumar asked, how would you measure user feedback before your product goes live in the market? Yeah, that's great. So there's a number of ways you can do that. And so, you know, what we tend to do, particularly in Seek Asia, is we do regular kind of, I think, fortnightly or monthly design research sessions. So we'll bring in users, we'll show them either products that are pretty much ready to be released or that we have in staging, or even just kind of high fidelity mock-ups of functional prototypes. And we'll observe their behavior, we'll ask them how they feel at the different stages of going through that. And we'll try and do this also, you know, across a number of different criteria. So we'll try and get not just users of our product, we'll try and get users of competing products as well if we can, to understand, you know, if we're getting closer to sort of solving problems for those people too. So, you know, as much as you can before your product goes live, the best thing you can do is kind of really try and get out there and show your product to customers, either in a controlled environment by inviting them into your office or by doing some kind of, you know, research session online or whatever it is. Or where possible, you know, particularly if you're a startup, even just go out and do some guerrilla testing, right? Like take your laptop, take your product if it's a website or whatever, go outside and just go and talk to people and see how they would feel about it. They may not be your users, but they'll give you some idea whether you're on the right track or not. So to give you an example of this, you know, when I launched the education marketplace for JobStreet about 4 years ago, you know, we were really operating for a very tight budget, even in spite of working for such a large enterprise. And we really wanted to bootstrap our product as much as possible. So I actually took my laptop one day, went to the Twin Towers in KL City Centre, and I just walked around and showed the website that we built to different people and asked them to navigate through the different pages. And, you know, we got some really good feedback. So some of the feedback we got was that our course descriptions for our education courses were far too long, right? Like nobody wanted to read such a long description, or if they did, they would rather read it, you know, when they were actually onto the course detail page itself. So, you know, think of all the different ways you can possibly go out and talk to your users or get your users to come and talk to you, and how you can show off your product as much as possible before then. Cool. So Bharat has a question: why successful products are killed without continuing, even though they're doing excellent in the market? So, for example, cell phones, Google purchase products. So I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I can't answer for all of those, I guess, but I think in a lot of cases, like, you know, cell phones, and by cell phones, I presume you're referring probably to kind of the older, like sort of Nokia style handphones. You know, I guess in that case, you know, they were very successful products, but even the manufacturers of those phones, kind of like the Nokia, etc., and Ericsson of the day, what they didn't foresee was just the tremendous growth in smartphones. And, you know, I think it was an entirely different kind of segment, or an entirely different industry almost by itself that just sprung up overnight. You know, so that's kind of my opinion about cell phones. And Google purchase products, I think you're right though with the tech industry. I think there's a lot of consolidation that we see, and a lot of kind of purchasing of very helpful startups that then go on to disappear. And you know, that's kind of annoying, but I suppose in a lot of cases the feeling of those larger companies like Google or Microsoft or whoever it is that perhaps they would like to eventually integrate the technology rather than the actual product into products that they themselves offer.
Great. Do we have any more questions?
I think
Sauradeep has a question by touch points in journey mapping.
and I just one question for Aswati. During their productization journey, how frequently or which all phases we have to involve the customer? So I guess I just want to clarify, when we say the productization journey, do we mean kind of that full stage from sort of discovery of the problem all the way through to delivery? Because I think, you know, if that's the case, as much as you can, you know, think about why you're building a product, right? You're building a product, I mean, for your business, of course, but you're also building it to solve user problems. If users don't have those problems, they don't need your product, right? So there's, in my opinion, there's not really a wrong amount of phases to involve a customer. I mean, the more feedback, the faster you can get that feedback, the faster you can learn and iterate. So as much as you can, keeping close to your customers, keeping a good relationship with your customers, and, you know, having this kind of group that you can reach out to and get a better understanding of their needs, you know, it's really critical if you want to be a good product manager. So I think where possible, involve your customer as much as you can, but also don't burden them to the point that, you know, it's if you're kind of reaching out to the same customers over and over for their feedback, then, you know, you've got to start asking yourself also, are you just building a product for this select group of customers? So that's just one thing to be wary of. But where possible, I think you should be involving your customers, you know, really as much as you can, at least enough to give you the feedback that you need to do your job effectively and well. Okay, cool. Let me just see.
Getting more questions.
Yeah, cool. Let me just go down a bit. How do you come up with new features for customers when you do not have an opportunity to interview in the first place, please? And that's from an anonymous. So how do you come up with features for customers? So, you know, I think a lot of what I've been sharing today, I hope, hasn't really involved you needing customers. So a lot of what I've been sharing about continuous discovery is, you know, this is something that you and your team can do as a whole. You can involve other stakeholders, perhaps from kind of customer support, sales, marketing, etc. You don't necessarily need customers actually in your room. You just need to be able to think, how are you as a customer approaching the problem that your product is trying to solve, right? So I don't think, you know, I think there's a danger, even though it's good to have the voice of the customer in the room as much as possible. And like I mentioned in the last question, you know, if you really can't get customers, or, you know, you've nobody to talk to, you know, it still doesn't detract from the fact that you're trying to solve a problem. And what is the problem you're trying to solve? What's the flow you're expecting your users to take? And what are the pain points of that along the way? I think, you know, when you put on your customer hat and you and your team all do the same thing, you should, you know, really have a good opportunity by yourselves to identify the pain points along that journey. Okay, cool. So I guess I'll just answer one or two more questions. Katan has asked, is the journey mapping process similar to building your marketing funnel if you're running a membership or subscription site? So it's quite true. I mean, I wouldn't say that it is, because in this particular case, the journey mapping, you know, journey mapping kind of can encapsulate as much of the funnel or as much of the flow as you possibly want. So, you know, it could be, as you say, if you're running a membership site, you know, all the stages from sort of awareness all the way through down to actually, you know, purchasing your membership and kind of onboarding, retention, etc. But it can also be a particular flow within your product, right? So, you know, the examples that I've given here are fairly high level, like how to post a classified job ad, how to post a job ad, for example, or how to look for a job. But it's also worthwhile trying to figure out, you know, what are the kind of parallel flows within your product, and you can also do journey mapping with that as well. But you're right, it does give the appearance of a funnel. I do agree, and I think if you're considering your product from start to finish, then, you know, it's not completely dissimilar to a marketing funnel. It still has many of the similar elements overlapping within it. But what we're doing here is not really so much marketing activity. It's more trying to address the pain points within your existing product, right? Hmm. So Joseph has asked, how do you ensure that the product team does not become a black box? And I think that's a great point, because I think there's so many product teams, probably globally, including ones that I've worked in, where we kind of operate almost like a code of silence. How do you keep the rest of the organization, including developers, well informed of future product improvements? I think as a product manager, and as a product leader, it's really your job actually to kind of keep the rest of the organization, including developers, well informed. So, I'm a very strong believer that developers will really do good work for you if you sold kind of the vision and the objectives of your product well to them in the first place. So kind of keeping everyone segregated in parallel is just not going to work, right? So I think it's up to you to find the right cadence and the right style of communication with your team. I can share a few things from kind of what we've done in the past. So, apart from regular catch-ups, and as a product manager, I even catch up one-on-one with my developers as well from time to time. We also do sharing sessions on Friday afternoon. So, a developer or a product manager or whoever it is going to talk something particular about their role. And I think keeping well informed really comes down also to setting the right ceremonies and the right processes in place in your organization. So, for example, maybe do a monthly showcase where you invite all the stakeholders to come and hear what kind of work you've been doing. If you're doing sprint demos or bi-weekly demos or fortnightly demos at the moment, and if you're doing it just among the product team or among, kind of the developer team, think about how you can reach out and do that at a slightly wider level. Or perhaps, for example, if it's possible, or if you have a go-to-market team within your company, try and leverage those colleagues to figure out how you can kind of better inform the rest of your organization. But I think, if you don't have sort of these large enterprise go-to-market teams or etc.,